Sorry, guys, we're just waiting for.
I know.
So I use this one.
You can use my mic. My mic's kind of iffy. My mic is not loud. Oh, the thing's not plugged in. Where's the thing?
This one.
Yeah.
No worries. It's a valid question. He was here. Off my laptop.
It even links to Swift.
Not here.
It's on here. I've only worked on this one.
Well, I have laminated my desk.
Like scope of processes right there. Challenges.
Use my pass.
Yeah, it's already my standalone. Where that's gonna be. It's just because I don't know if it's not my own website, but so I'll just use this. I just need to do it.
I'm sure there's a lot of work. I'm sure like by these changes, we're just
80 possible points
I'm
from
pretty
this
sure
one.
they like revise everything.
Jacob, you need to go to class.
Go to your class,
The next thing
Jacob.
I'm gonna work
Yeah,
on
Jacob,
is
go to
the
class.
registration.
No, I'm sorry. I got a Python. I got a Python.
Yeah, give it up for our Spencer.
Wait, what's my comp grade?
Do you have time for summer class?
Vote Jacob for one of his three positions.
I'm actually only like
Registration. That's the box. Definitely got inspired off the
because they require.
Yeah, I remember.
Registry was interesting.
It wasn't.
Yeah, hopping around like actually to the box after all that.
All right, everyone.
Operation.
Hello, everyone. We're gonna get started now. So please sign in if you haven't already. I'm gonna go through a few more. Yeah, so welcome to this week's meeting. There's a few announcements. E-board elections are out, the ballots are out. The deadline to submit the ballots is next week. It's for paid members only. This Thursday, there's going to be a Missa Swift collaboration where you're going to be able to work on your professional development skills, learn how to ace your interview this Thursday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. We'll provide more details later. Next Tuesday, Hoag Hospital is going to come out and speak to us about their internship opportunities. So if you really want to get the edge on your professional development and be able to connect with the recruiters and the other people working at Hoag, then be sure to attend all these events. But without further ado, without further ado, Gabe is going to be talking about red versus blue.
So as Taylor wonderfully introduced me, I'm Gabriel. I am Swift Spring RvB director. So I'm basically the event coordinator for this whole thing. And today we're going to be going over the briefing for how this entire event is gonna work. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the four things that we're going to cover for today. We're going to cover how RvB works. So if this is your first time, we get a rundown on what that entails. If you've already had an RvB with us before, then you'll recognize a lot of similar things, but there have been some changes. Then we're going to go into the briefing packet. So this is going to contain a lot more detailed information about the specifics of the competition. Everything that's in there was chosen specifically. Everything that's not in there, it's also a very conscious decision. We may update the briefing packet throughout the week in case we need to. So we'll let you know in the Discord if we do, so you'll know what changes to look for. Then we're going to touch on the scoring engine, how to get points. That's basically that section. And lastly, we'll end things off with tips and tricks. So just useful things to keep in mind when you are doing an red versus blue engagement. And these things will be expanded upon during the Friday workshop, where we'll cover these things more in depth. But for now, we're gonna keep things a little bit higher level. So we'll kick things off with how RvB works. I want to start off this section with a quote from a former CPP CCDC competitor. If you guys aren't aware, CCDC is the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. There are unfortunately only 12 spots per year on this team, but RvB is designed to kind of bring the experience that those 12 have and bring them down for everyone else so that we can essentially have as large of a team as we want. But this is a quote from a former competitor who said, "At the end of the day, no one cares who won. You did something that you didn't have to just to learn. That's what people remember." RvB is a competition, technically, yes, but I want you guys to focus on the aspect that is a learning opportunity. You aren't going to get, an internship just because you won red versus blue. But the fact that you competed in red versus blue, the fact that you made a checklist for it, the fact that you went to meetings for it, that shows dedication, that shows that you care, that shows that you are a great person, student. And yeah, I really want to make sure that the focus of the competition isn't to win. It's not to gain points. It's not to, try to be sly and cheat or anything like that. You're not going to get rewarded for that kind of behavior. So I wanted to start off with that. The 3 core lessons of RvB, these are the things or ideals that we hope that you walk away with. First of all, is learn by doing. It's the slogan of Cal Poly Pomona and Cal Poly's in general. During RvB, you're going to learn and apply real-world skills used in the cybersecurity industry. That's going to be a ton of different things, and it changes every red versus blue. So the more you go to, hopefully the more you learn. Second thing is business thinking. You got to think like a business and try to actually fulfill those companies' goals. If the goal of the company is to maintain uptime no matter what, then that needs to be your focus. If the company says, we don't really care about uptime too much, we just want to make sure that our product is as secure as possible, then that should be your focus. You need to make sure that your cybersecurity approach matches the cybersecurity policy of the company, or at least what the company wants, not necessarily already has. And lastly, you get to practice collaboration and teamwork. This is by far one of the most important things that you will take away from red versus blue. I know some of you signed up with full teams. That's great. That's wonderful. Some of you signed up individually, and you're going to be placed with an entire roster full of people you've never met before. That's a great opportunity to learn things about new people. It's also a great opportunity for you to practice the same, work set or skill set that you'll have if you get an internship for the first time or start a new job. You're going to have to meet these new people, this new team, and start collaborating with them. You'll have this week to kind of get to know each other. We should have already sent the rosters of everybody to everyone who already applied for red versus blue. So everybody should know who's on their team. I highly suggest that you either have some kind of like stand-up meeting or create a group chat or something like that, so that everyone in your respective teams can kind of get a feel for where your skill sets are at, what your goals are, if you want to put in extra time to kind of prepare outside of the Tuesday and Friday meetings. I highly recommend that you all do that. And now for a summary of red versus blue. The RvB is designed to be a beginner to intermediate level competition focused in system administration and incident response. This means that you're going to have a heavy focus in understanding how services work, understanding how systems work, understanding how they work together, and ultimately how to prevent a threat actor from progressing and progress through your network. So your role in all of this is that you will be an incident response team for a fictional company, which we will reveal shortly. And your goal is to secure the environment while preventing business services from going down. What does that entail? It means that you will start off the competition with everything running and functioning just as it should, but there will be a red team, an advanced persistent threat, or APT for short, that has already kind of messed with your environment a little bit to give themselves an easier foothold. Your Security team has noticed that there's been some suspicious activity and has brought you on board to the extra precaution just in case something happens. Spoiler alert, something does or will happen. So during red versus blue, there will be a text file on the desktop of the default user. Default user will be stated inside of the briefing packet, and we'll also touch on that a little bit. This will contain all of the local users and administrators that are supposed to be on that specific computer. So for example, if that text document says, only the root user is allowed, then there should be no other users. If it's a Windows computer, it says, we should have administrator and Joe and Bob, then those are the only 3 accounts that should be allowed. If you find other ones, well, I want to investigate. Red team will start off slow. They're still trying to break into your environment, but they will ramp up over time, meaning that if you are unable to secure your system sufficiently in the earlier parts of the competition, you will be paying for that in the later parts. As always, during red versus blue, you'll have the opportunity to ask for a box revert. What that means is that you can specifically request for one of your boxes in your network to be reverted back to the initial state that the competition started off as. You can do that, but all the security configurations that you applied, all the user auditing changes or whatever, all of that will go away too. So you'll have to start off fresh and you'll have to secure it down as fast as possible. And remember, since red team ramps up over time, if you get a box revert a little bit later in the competition, they might be able to access your system very, very quickly. At the end of the day, your goal is to secure your boxes entirely and keep red team out. But realistically, the red team pretty much always wins. It's whoever can lose less is the winner. But if you manage to lock them out, then that's a very significant show of skill and dedication. So if anybody is able to completely lock our red team, hats off to you. Now we're going to talk about the briefing packet. The briefing packet is going to, like I mentioned, contain a lot of more specific details. We're going to cover the highlights here. There will be a link to it in the presentation. So you'll be able to see it on screen and kind of type it in. It should be a PDF. And there it is. So first thing we're going to talk about is the access to the environment. So on the day of, which starts at 1 p.m. on this Saturday, we will release the VPN files and related credentials so that you can log into our system here. For those of you who are competing in person, we'll be able to troubleshoot with you. So we recommend that you show up a little bit early. For those people who will be competing online, we highly recommend that you appear in the Discord that we'll release a little bit later this week. You appear on that online a little bit early as well, so that we can help troubleshoot in case anybody's having any problems with the VPN. But once you get the VPN access, you'll be able to connect to our vSphere system that will allow you to view the environment, allow you to connect to the environment. And like I mentioned, you'll get the vSphere credentials as well on the day of. So yeah, that's the important part there. Are there any questions on just the connectivity or access so far? This is really important for you to actually get on the environment. So okay, if there's no questions on that, then we can move on. Services. I'm sure this is what everybody is dying to hear about. So there's going to be these 5 main types of services. There may be a couple others that might appear, but these are the ones that I would highly recommend that you take a look at and research in your own time. SSH, HTTP, technically HTTPS as well, Active Directory or AD for short, DNS and SQL. These are the main ones that you'll see, or I should say may see. But these ones are very general, non-specific, So we highly recommend that you just get familiar with the concepts of each. We'll be touching base on that on Friday, just roughly what those may look like. But these are the 5 main ones that I would definitely recommend you look into. Yeah, these are the main ones. Okay, default credentials. Default credentials are going to have the password of wasabi, and the default username will be wasadmin. And if you're on Linux, you'll have the root account as normal. If you are on a Windows box, you'll have administrator like normal. But all the passwords should be wasabi. Passwords for everything should be wasabi. So, when you get on your boxes, you'll just have to figure out which user account you need to, and then you'll sign in with the password of wasabi. Yeah, that's pretty much how it works. It's pretty straightforward. If there are other local users that are allowed on your box, in the text file that I mentioned, all of those passwords should also be wasabi. Basically, everybody's password is wasabi. That's why it's called the default credential. And on that note, for specific services, they may be scored with like a certain set of credentials that we need to log in as. So if you change your passwords for like the user accounts or a specific service, we're going to need you to submit a password change request, or PCR for short. The way that those work is very simple. It's detailed in the briefing packet, but just to go over it briefly, you'll submit a CSV with a particular format. It will contain the usernames and passwords you're going to be setting them as, and then we know on our end that we need to change those on the scoring engine so that it scores properly. It's very important that you submit those password change requests whenever you change a password, because that way, if we're logging into something, for example, as an SSH server, then it's going to require those credentials. And if we have the default credential of wasabi and you change the password to like password 1234, then we're going to keep trying to log in with wasabi and it will keep failing because it's not the right password. So really important that you keep on track of that. We have like a special tool that's inside the briefing packet that's meant to kind of help you generate those CSVs a little bit faster in case you're unsure of the format, but you don't have to use it. You can make it manually if you want, but that's the credentials. Are there any questions about the default credentials or password change requests? I'm also looking at Zoom here, just in case there is a question. Okay, in that case, we will keep moving on. So topology, figure it out. There's not going to be a topology given to you at the beginning of competition. You're supposed to kind of figure out what's on your environment and stuff like that. We will tell you that it's 50% Windows, 50% Linux, and there will be one router. That router will also be in the scope for the red team, meaning that you'll also have to learn how to defend your router. The router is very, very important because all of your individual systems are connected to it. That's how they get network connectivity. So if red team is able to pwn your router, take it down, make it not functional, then all of your systems lose internet access. All of your systems can get scored. They all go down. So if you ever see a team on the scoreboard that's all red across the board, the router went down. Be very careful with it too. If, for example, you try to do some kind of security configuration on your router and it runs out of CPU usage or something and it hoops itself, then it would also go down and you might need to get a box revert on the router itself. Yeah, I will also mention that this is a great opportunity to practice inventorying skills. So you'll have to be able to see what systems you have, what services are running, what services are connected to each other across different boxes and things like that. We highly recommend using a topology creator or diagram creator, such as diagrams.net. It allows you to kind of put these things together so you can try it out for your team and be like, okay, so we have X many boxes that has these services on each box, and this one's connected to that one. It uses this set of credentials, things like that. it's gonna help you a lot in the long run of things. And if you don't do inventory, well, that might bite you in the butt when something apparently is being scored, but you don't know where it is, and then it goes down, and then you don't know where, how to fix it because you don't know where it is. So highly, highly recommend that you practice inventorying skills. That's one thing that we will touch on the Friday workshop, how to work on that. Things to do. Okay, any questions about the topology? Next up is injects. Injects. These things are pretty important. We'll touch on why in the next section on the scoring engine. But injects are going to be business tasks that the business assigned to you. If you have opened up the packet already, then you'll know that your boss is going to be named Abe was, and he will be assigning you specific things that he wants you to do. It could be anything. You got to be prepared for anything. It could range from writing up a short report. It could be delivering a short presentation. He might be asking you to stand up a new service. He might be asking you to take down a service. It really could be anything. So just be prepared to be flexible. Injects are meant to be curveballs. It's meant to kind of throw you off and see how you can adjust. In the real world, this is a very real thing. You might lose half your team and now you have to pick up their slack. Budget cuts happen all the time. So we highly recommend that you take injects very seriously. You will be graded on professionalism. So for example, if Abe was asks you for a report and you start using slang terms, you start using abbreviations, and you will be marked down on that. But if you submit just a very generic, decently professional report, then you'll probably get full points for professionalism. Generally speaking, it's harder to not get professionalism points than it is to actually get them. So yeah, just write as you normally would a regular report and you'll probably be fine. A very common question that we get for injects is, do you get extra points for submitting them early? No, you don't get extra points for submitting them early. As long as you submit them before the deadline, you can get full points. If you submit them after the deadline, you get 0 points. So if you're going to do them before the deadline. Anytime before the deadline is fine. Some people might say, well, they want to do it early so that they just get it out of the way. Other people will put it off to the very end so that they can focus on whatever they're working on. That kind of strategy is up to you and your team. You may want to designate somebody to be the injects person that, in addition to them managing their computers and things like that, that they have a little bit extra focus in, writing or presentations or things like that. It's a good idea to have. You don't want to, get injects that you're not prepared for, and then somebody is just not prepared. Jack, you have a question?
Will all of these injects deal with a change to the systems?
Not necessarily. It could be just writing a report. It could be delivering a short presentation. Everything is kind of designed to hopefully not take too much time. But they are meant to kind of take one person off of the environment from what they're currently doing and kind of shift focus. Any other questions? Yeah.
Right, what's the next word?
We'll touch on that in just a little bit. Anything, other questions? I didn't see any on the Zoom. No? Okay. So now we're going to touch on the scoring engine and kind of how the scoring works to touch on your question. So the scoring engine is new and improved from fall. It's going to have a couple new features. So as before, you will be graded on, or I should say scored on service uptime, which is basically how long your service has been up for that portion of the competition. You'll also be graded on SCS. So SCS is scored configuration settings. And basically the way that works is that we are specifically checking each of your boxes for some very specific things. these are not meant to be the only configurations that you apply, but they're generally considered good practice. They're generally supposed to be applied on almost everything, or at least that specific system. For example, if you have an SSH server, you generally don't want to permit root login, and that's a setting. So as an example, we might be, checking that file and seeing if that has been properly disabled. And if it has, you'll get points for that. At the beginning of competition, you won't start off with any SCS points. So everything that is considered a scored configuration setting is something that you'll have to manually configure. If you are familiar with Cyber Patriot, pretty much how their engine works. I will also mention that scored configuration settings are scored through SSH. So every system needs to be running SSH in order for you to get scored configuration setting points. If you don't want scored configuration setting points, go ahead, you can remove SSH, but they are worth a good chunk of points. Injects are obviously the last thing that you'll be scored on. Injects are graded manually. So you won't see any inject scores in the scoring engine itself. Once you submit them, and we'll grade them within our operations team. And at the very end of competition, we'll have a very short awards ceremony where we'll just say, who got the most points in injects, who got the most point in secure configuration settings, who got the most points in uptime, to kind of give credit where that's due to all of you. And then we'll reveal the person or the team who had the overall highest score. And this is kind of what the scoring engine looks like. You'll see at the top that we have, overview will show all the teams what your services are looking like at the current moment. Services, which is this bottom view where you can see your specific team's services. This is just an example, by the way, don't get too giddy about it. And then the last tab up there says SCS. It'll just be a list of which configurations that you've put on which box. And, if you got it correct, if you found the right thing, then, that'll be good. Adding on a little bit about SCS, because it's a new thing. A scored configuration setting, as I mentioned, could be something like permit root login on SSH servers. It could be removing an unauthorized user. It could be setting a user to be an administrator when they weren't. All of these things are considered valid configuration settings. So just be aware of that. That's why it's very important for that users document on your desktops, because obviously you will have that list of authorized users and authorized administrators. So all of those things are valid to be scored. Are there any questions on that end of things? Yeah, Clements?
So for SCS, would that be similar to what Cyber Patriot does?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So would that also include potentially removing media files?
Technically, yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's largely inspired by Cyber Patriot. It's just going to be greatly reduced. Cyber Patriot, for example, once you reach, or Hivestorm, if you're familiar with that competition, they normally reach around 40 per box.
Right.
Here, that's not the main focus, so we're only having around 3 to 5 per box, just to kind of give you some points if you're finding these things. But yeah, any other questions? Okay. Moving on then. So by the numbers. So here is kind of the breakdown of how scoring works through numbers. So every service is going to be worth 30 points for every check that it is up. And every SCS that you get will be worth 100 points. SCS is scored one time. So, and that time is at the very end of competition. So once the competition is over, we'll see how many SCS that you have in total. And we'll just multiply that by 100, and that's how many points you get for SCS. So if you found every single thing, every single scored configuration setting at the very beginning of competition, but then red team attacks you, you have to get box reverts at the very end, and your systems are brand new, well, you lose all your SCS. So, that's something that you have to keep in mind. SCS is worth a good chunk of points. I want to say that it's worth about 20% of your final score. anywhere between 20 to 25%. Injects are worth 1,000 points total for each inject. We're planning on having about 3 injects. So that's going to be about 30% of your final score. And then the remaining chunk, so that's about 50% of your score, will be service uptime. There will be no service level agreements, meaning that if your system is down for the entire competition, the only penalty you'll get is that you didn't gain points. So if you were familiar with, I don't know, Cyber Patriot or CCDC, where those competitions penalize you for having downtime, well, that's not the case here. Here's more about being a learning environment, so we're not going to penalize you any more than you need to be. So in total, we're expecting there to be about 10,800 points at the end of it. May fluctuate depending on how things end up being. Large part of that is how the scoring engine works, which is that it has rounds where it checks everybody's boxes for if services are up, if their configurations are set, and that time can kind of vary depending on if it's up or down, because if it's down, it's going to take longer. So we're estimating about 10,000 points total. That might be less or more, but yeah. If it's less than that, that means injects and configuration settings are going to be worth more. If it's more than that, then they're going to be less. That's just kind of how it works out. Are there any questions about how scoring is rubriced? Yeah.
Do box resets cost points?
No, box reverts will not cost points, but box reverts may take a little bit of time to get done. We're going to be a little bit short-staffed on that day. So yeah. Also adding on box reverts, we are planning on having box reverts be available for the entirety of competition. But if you are kind of reverting your boxes too fast, like you're asking for a revert every 5 minutes, we're going to kind of stop you there. If you're getting like, a box revert every so often, then it's fine. We'll just give you the box revert. Just don't ask for it too often. Yeah, are there any other questions on scoring rubric? Yeah.
Is red team activity scored?
Red team activity will not be scored for this competition. The penalty is that your service goes down. So yeah.
Oh, no.
Generally speaking, red team will not be targeting your SES, but they can. It's technically within scope. Yeah.
So what if we kidnap the entire red team?
Only one of you.
It's true. If you can find them,
What if I recruit the entire blue team?
I'm not stopping you.
There's also remote red teamers.
Yeah, there is also remote red teamers. So
What if we kidnap them too?
then I guess you win, but I don't recommend it. But adding on to that, I'm not going to stop you from working with other teams. That's perfectly fine. So if you want to create one giant super mega team against red team, that's in scope. But that's up to you. Lastly, we're going to kind of round things out with some tips and tricks. These just some things that you should keep in mind when doing these kinds of engagements. We're going to start it off with some basic strategy. This is the most basic strategy you can use in these kinds of red versus blue situations. This applies to the real world as well. Number one, inventory. Number one thing is figure out what you have. What is it connected to? How are they related to other things? This is so important. You might want to make a spreadsheet for it. You might want to jot it down on a piece of paper or a sticky note or something like that. This is the number one thing, because at the end of the day, you need to know what you have to secure in order to secure it, right? Know thyself. Very, very famous phrase. I highly recommend the very first thing that you do is inventory. You can probably inventory for the first 10, 15 minutes and nothing bad will happen to you, right? So I highly recommend that you use that time period for inventory. Once you have an idea of what's actually on your network and what's on your environment, how it's related to different things, that's when you can start baselining your systems. What that means is that you establish a certain level of security across the line. That's your baseline. And that way, for example, okay, I know that I'm scored on SSH or all the boxes have SSH because of SES, so I need to, at the very least, apply these configuration settings for SSH. Okay, that's an example of baselining. You're not going to be focused on finding, the super small vulnerabilities. You're just going to catch the very low hanging fruit, the obvious things, the things that you can kind of automate or just, very quickly do. And just do it across the board as fast as possible. You'll have, 4 people per team. So this is a good opportunity to kind of spread out and do that. The last step that we recommend is to harden after you baseline. So once you've already, gone across the board and applied a certain level of security to your systems, that's when you get into the nitty-gritty of things. That's when you start, setting certain people to focus on certain boxes, focus on certain services, if that's your strategy, and really focus on, applying those smaller configuration settings that are more specific to that particular system or environment that are a little bit more niche. This is also when you'll start looking for smaller configuration settings that, might not be a vulnerability in and of itself. Some things might require a certain group of vulnerabilities together to really be a attack vector for red team. So those ones that require, several vulnerabilities altogether are generally considered to be in this hardening phase where you'll address those. This is, like I said, a very basic strategy, but it works. It's essential to, what you're going to do. Some variation of it is always good. But this is kind of where things start off with. And obviously, if you are working with your team, you can specialize, you can refine it a little bit more. But this is what we recommend you start off with if you've never done this kind of thing before. Are there any questions about strategy? Yeah.
No grace period to start off the competition.
We won't tell you how long it is, but you will have one. Yeah, so we're just gonna start off with some kind of grace period. We could start at any time. If red team starts noticing that you're starting locking things down too fast, for example, they might start a little bit sooner. Yeah, any other questions maybe on this side? Okay, nothing on Zoom. So here are some more general tips. Web servers, always going to be a web server. There's always going to be a web server. Web servers are, usually speaking, the bread and butter of most companies, right? If you think about Google, for example, they have a website. Think about Amazon, they have a website. Think about, I don't know, Nordstrom Rack, they have a website. All of these companies are going to have a website. So web servers, you got to know. You got to understand how they work and what they might be relying on. Some very common examples of them will be Apache 2, Nginx, and IIS. There are more technically, but these ones are the most common ones. And web servers can be on Linux, they can be on Windows. They won't be on their router, I'll tell you that much, but they technically could be. The next thing is to learn about dependent services. So as an example, there's this concept known as a LAMP stack, or a Linux Apache MySQL PHP stack. LAMP stacks are a type of web server package that they're basically all working together to create dynamic websites. These things are very powerful, but they require multiple things working together. Just off the top of my head, Apache and MySQL, right? One's a web server, one's a database server, right? They need to communicate with each other through PHP. So right off the bat, you have 3 things working together. There are other examples of combinations of services. There are other examples of services relying on services. So being able to kind of map those things out and understanding how they rely on each other is very important. So as an example, if you have a LAMP stack, for example, running a content management system such as WordPress, which is a blogging service, then you can figure out, for example, where your database is by looking at the configuration file, because it's going to be connected to a database somewhere, and you'll need to figure out where it is so you can properly secure it. If you have 3 databases on your environment, well, it's only going to be pulling from one. So you'll need to figure out, how to find the correct database and just, manually going through it and checking every database if it has the right data. It's not a very efficient solution. Third thing is Active Directory. This is for Windows people. Active Directory is absolutely huge. I highly recommend that if you've never worked with Active Directory before, you look into what is a domain. You look into how domains affect networks, how they control networks, and things like that. They're very powerful tools when secure, but they're also very powerful weapons when unsecure. So keep that in mind. If you have somebody who's experienced with Active Directory management, that'll be very, very strong. And if you don't happen to have anyone who's experienced with Active Directory, well, that might be something you want to focus on this week. Very, 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 very common in most business environments. So you'll want to learn that for sure. And lastly, we highly, highly, highly recommend you make a checklist of some kind, whether it be, modifying this basic strategy or creating one by yourself, or maybe you already have one, or maybe you have something from your job. I don't know. But just create some kind of checklist, some kind of steps that you can follow. When you're in the middle of competition, you're going to be stressed out of your mind. You're like, oh, my services are going down. Oh, there's a new inject or something like that. So having a checklist helps you keep on track. You say, okay, I've done this step. I need to move on to this step. You get an inject. Okay, I have an inject, but I'm still on this step, and things like that. It also helps everybody, know where everybody else is. Because if you have, a checklist for Linux and you have a checklist for Windows, then someone could be saying, I'm kind of falling behind on my checklist here, right? I need some help. That kind of gives people an idea of what you've already done, so they know not to double down on that effort, and you don't waste time like that. So checklists are very, very, very important. Obviously, it takes time to make. So if you would like to, we're going to have kind of like a checklist workshop on Friday, where we're going to be going over all of the basics things here, like how to inventory and what that kind of entails. We're kind of going to be helping you flesh out checklists a little bit. And yeah, if there are any questions about either the briefing packet or anything else related to RvB, I'm happy to answer those questions. But that's everything that we have for today. So we'll see you on Friday and Saturday. And thank you.